renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebest. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurposed alongside Ben Tejas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe you found us on the radio waves. Maybe you found us online. Regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, subscribe, and better yet, leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you just take a moment and do that, we would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career, building wealth 30, 40, 50 plus years, and then shutting it off on Retirement Friday without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this episode, we continue our series on retirement happiness. Society tells us that retirement is the time when we can truly live and be happy. But does retirement make good on that promise? Furthermore, what makes us happy in the first place? Well, today we talk about finding your passions. Oftentimes, discovering and living within your passions is advice given to young people, but it's rarely ever part of the retirement conversation. In this podcast, Ben gives you ways to rediscover your passions in retirement and encourages you to find the things that truly make you come alive. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, welcome back. We are continuing our series on retirement happiness, and we're going to talk about things that make you come alive. So this is a really important show, certainly a really important part of the retirement conversation, and one that is not talked about hardly at all, or certainly not enough in today's world. So this is a really important show. We are so glad that you are joining us here today. Before we get started, just a reminder, we have a Facebook group created just for you retirees. It is called Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. Join a growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. Look for all the latest and greatest content updates from our entire platform. Again, if you want to keep tabs on everything that we're doing here on the podcast, on the platform, our website's a great tool, retirerepurpose.com. But to get the latest and greatest stuff, and again, all of our updates, make sure you go to our Facebook page as well. Just go to facebook.com and search Becoming Repurposed in Retirement to join this growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. Ben Tejas joins me on the show here today. And again, we have now been covering this whole idea of retirement happiness for quite a while. We've covered kind of the money side. That's kind of the time, talent, treasure, the treasure piece. We're spending really some time now, and have spent the last several shows, talking about the talent piece, the repurpose side of this. And this is kind of really the bread and butter. Really, this is where it all started. If we rewind the tape 5-6 years when you wrote your book, Repurpose: The Untold Story of Retirement in America, this was really the essence of that message, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, Jared. I think up until that time, I kind of was doing our business, the retirement planning business, much like, unfortunately, I think many retirement planners today do it. We focus so much on, the financial part, and we're looking at spreadsheets, we're looking at numbers, and while all that stuff is very important and is really, I think, what our clients are paying us for, that advice, the truly valuable advice, the stuff that I think where we really earn our keep, is making their lives better, right? And I don't think I can tell somebody to retire financially, walk into that space, unless I have looked at what their life will look like. And more importantly, I've helped them. I've guided them to a place that their life will be better in retirement. And sometimes what happens is we give advice for people to retire, and they walk into that time expecting it to be great, and it falls short. And they walk into that and they're like, man, this isn't what I expected it to be. This isn't what society kind of showed me retirement was going to be. And that's how I did things. I would come into meetings and we'd focus on numbers, we'd focus on planning and all that stuff that we're coached with, or that we learn over the course of our careers. And then I just didn't take that next step. And believe me, it's way more than just saying, hey, don't forget, volunteer. Don't forget, you got to have a hobby. It goes way deeper than that.
Yeah, and again, in your defense, I think you were just kind of reading from the textbook that society has kind of created, not literally, but just kind of the narrative. This is something that we probably have never shared on the show here before, but between you and I, the mission statement behind what we're trying to do, we want to rewrite the narrative on retirement, rewrite the conversation, rewrite how retirement planning is not only executed by retirement professionals, but also how it is viewed upon and lived out by retirees. And that's a big undertaking because, again, just kind of the old way of doing things, just like, save up a nest egg, create an income plan, which are all good, but it's more than just, again, throw a little purpose on the side and, hey, if you have a little fun, everything's great, and that should be the end, and it really isn't that way.
No, it's so much deeper. I think even my work, in the financial planning world, needs to be much deeper than that. I mean, I look at, and this is going off script, so hopefully you'll let me go here, but I think many times our work as financial professionals ends up looking like the Old Testament in the Bible, where they had actual idol creators. Okay, so go with me here.
Okay.
It's a stretch, but I think it applies. They would actually, there was a vocation out there where somebody would handcraft an idol, and it would look like a golden calf, or it would look like something else, an actual idol creator. There was actually jobs would make more beautiful and better idols. Okay, and if I go about my financial work with clients, and my whole entire goal is to make them wealthier, just to make them richer for being richer's sake, or for being richer for the fact that they are going to then, be somehow happier or be more fulfilled by the money side, or they're going to be living better lives if they just buy more, and I just help them accumulate, and I don't go beyond that to say, what is your life like? How are you living your life as a part of God's kingdom? If my job is just to make them richer, then I think I begin to have a job and a career as a financial professional that starts to look like the Old Testament idol creators. And that's why I think this is important stuff we're talking about today. Is it goes way beyond just helping somebody with their portfolio. It goes into, let's help them get a better life. And we know in retirement that you can't have a better life just because you're not working. It just, that is not the answer.
Well, I've never heard you connect the dots between the retirement planning business and idol creation. That's a new one for me that you're hearing live on the show. So congratulations on that. I do agree with you, though. Again, we don't typically have physical idols in this world, but we have a lot of other things that are still idols, most certainly. And again, if you're giving out advice that is helping create an idol, whether it's a number on a page, it's the same type of thing that is not good, not holy.
Yeah, just be reinforcing what people are already feeling and what society is making them feel. Is like more is better. Right. And certainly, I'm not against people having wealth and enjoying that wealth. I mean, some of my great friends are very, very wealthy. I think just living in America today, we all have some degree of wealth, and there's nothing wrong with that until it becomes an idol, and until it starts to own you, and you are just, your entire role as a person is trying to create more and create more. That does not work, right? An idol really is anything that we put before God. It's something that we look to and spend more time with, put our trust in. Yeah, and that's where I think our work needs to look different, right? And if I'm doing my job, I'm helping people see, don't put retirement as some idol either. Don't make it as this thing that it's not meant to be. And we can go through the history of it, and we've done that on past shows. Yeah. It was never designed to make people fulfilled, to make people happy. It was always supposed to be something that was necessary, okay, and that people could certainly lately in most modern history now in the last 40 years has become more of a kind of a permanent vacation feel. And there's parts of that are good. You've worked very hard. You should be able to enjoy that time. but it shouldn't be looked at as now my life is fulfilled. I have now arrived somewhere. It wasn't the destination.
Right.
It's just part of life that, hey, if you've saved enough, you don't have to work for income anymore. Now you can move on and do other things. And that's what we're talking about. That's why I love today's show, is because then sometimes we have the income that we don't rely on our job anymore. And now we can really chase what makes us happy, our passions.
Yeah, exactly. Little shout out to previous shows. If you're this is maybe your first time tuning in to us, you're like, what are these guys talking about? Yes, money is an important part of the retirement process, but there's what we call a money disorder. We covered it about 5-6 shows ago. I encourage you to go to iTunes while you're there, subscribe. We say it every show, but look at some of those shows. Listen to some of those shows, especially the one called the money disorder, because this is a concept that, again, is just not talked about enough or at all in the retirement space. You have to have the right mindset and framework over your wealth and your money. That's why the Bible talks about it over 2,000 times, not because money's bad, but when it becomes the idol, when you're serving a master. The love of money is the root of all evil. And again, we could spend entire shows just on this concept, but go back and listen to those shows. All right, we're going to continue on this trek of really rediscovering your repurpose. And again, this is all part of the retirement happiness conversation. 2 shows ago, we talked about leveraging your experiences. If you're going to truly find your repurpose, you have to reflect inward. As you move forward, it's going to start with looking backward. We talked about reflecting on experiences, the good ones, the bad ones, understanding what you've been through. Last week, we talked about doubling down on your abilities. This is kind of the next layer, and each one of these shows is kind of sequential. So once we reflect on our experiences, now we have to understand our abilities, and we broke those down into the 2 categories. Ben, give a quick little recap to last week's show.
Yeah, I think the simplest way to break down abilities is to look at the difference between talents and skills. And as you're looking and thinking through the talents and skills differentiation, it helps you really dig into what those things are. So I look at a talent as being a God-given thing. That's something that I'm just plain old good at. Those are natural things that we do well. And if I'm looking at a skill as far as one of my abilities, I'm saying this is something that is learned or acquired. So you take the carpenter analogy, hey, I'm just naturally good with my hands. And then the skill is actually applying that God-given talent to the trade of construction, and that would be, the framing, the swing of the hammer, everything else that comes into, and there's so much more than that, but I think that's the simplest way I can describe it.
I've had this conversation with retirees where I've said, hey, tell me about what you're really good at. What are some things that you are just really gifted in? And unfortunately, the response I get many times is I kind of get the turn of the head like, well, I'm not really good at anything, and I just worked at this a job, and I was just fill in the blank. And that really saddens us, doesn't it? Like where, again, there's a devalue. This is a different conversation, but there's a devalue of retirees' ability to bring value in these areas. Have you noticed that too over the years of working with retirees?
Yeah, I think so many times society has brought that to them. It's like, yeah, just because you're older, you kind of move out of the way, right? Make room for the younger people. And I think that's an issue in and of itself, is that people need to realize you've been working for 30, 40 years, whatever your career was. There are definitely skills that you're good at, right? And there's skills you've learned, and there's talents that God made you in a certain way. He's given you a uniqueness. You've got to figure out, how you can apply those things to your retirement.
Yeah, could be vocation, could be other areas. I just think of like my wife is a stay-at-home mom, and I'm watching how she has even grown in her character, patience, compassion, which she already was naturally gifted at that. But again, whether you worked a career or led a business, by the time you reach 60, 70 years old, you've got a lifetime of honing in on these skills. And again, there's character traits too, and wisdom, for crying out loud, that you have that needs to be leveraged and utilized. So today we're going to talk about what makes you come alive. Again, this is kind of the next layer. So again, experiences, then abilities, which would be skills and talents. And now we're going to layer on this next piece. Ben, you've already kind of mentioned what it is. What is this magical kind of secret sauce?
Well, it's passion, Jared. It's that thing that you can't walk away from. It's the thing that really, like the title of our show, what makes you come alive. And I love working with retirees when we can figure that out with them. Go back, look at things that they've always done that they've just enjoyed doing. Many times their work has gotten in the way of that. That's something that I love. And I think that is something that I've had other authors, other fans of us tell me that makes a lot of sense about our message. I think of Dan Miller. He's an amazing author, and the work they do with their and the book he wrote specifically that applies here is 48 Days to the Work You Love. And what he did is he talked about how people many times in their careers start to feel a little discontentment. It's like, I don't feel like I'm right where God wants me to be. So why is that? And he said, if you can combine three things, and that would be some skills to the work that you're going to be doing, some passion for it. You got to have passion. You got to want to do it. And then some economic validation. You got to get paid for it, right? When Dan endorsed my book, I think part of the reason was because, we used some of his information there. We said, in retirement, you still need to look at what skills you have, right? But if you combine them with some passion, you'll walk into that fulfillment. You don't need the economic validation anymore. I think many times for retirees, they find that is what makes that part of their life so great, is because you're hopefully getting income from other sources,
right.
And I can spend my time, what do I really enjoy doing, and what am I gifted to, and you combine that 1-2 punch, and man, you can see people walk into new careers. Sometimes they even find that they enjoy it so much that they actually do go back into and get work again, and they actually do add the economic validation. But it starts with finding what they are good at, what they have some skills and talents towards, and then moves into, they got to have passion.
I think that brings up a really good point about how retirees are uniquely positioned, that if they have done the financial planning part correctly and well, and they've got the plan all set up, this is so liberating, not because it sets them free. Now I don't have to work, and I can be done with the confines and the the drudgery of work. Now it positions them to set them free, to say, now I can now just go after it and swing for the fences. And I hate to say this, but this is just not talked about. When was the last time, if you're listening to this and a retiree or approaching retirement, when has somebody challenged you to really say, now's the time to follow our passions? Unfortunately, it's just not the case.
Well, we say it to young people all the time,
right,
Jerry. We say it to kids. We're like, hey, follow your passion. You can do so much, and you can make a difference, and just follow what you're passionate towards, and then figure it out. I think retirees should hear that message more than young people, because they've got a certain skill set already. They've got the things we've been talking about. If they can get some passion towards, leading, and a passion towards, maybe if it's bringing a new company. I mean, I love this quote from C.S. Lewis. He says, "You're never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream." Just because you're 65 should not mean you're done dreaming. In fact, some of the greatest companies, some of the greatest thinkers, the movers, the shakers from in our lifetimes have come when they were in their 60s, when they were in their 70s. So I love working with retirees for that reason.
I think it's also interesting. We tell kids to follow their passion. I've said that with a bit of a disclaimer. Sometimes I'll say, it's great to have the passion, and that's certainly part of the equation. But we also have to kind of look at where we're naturally gifted and where we can utilize our skills. Why is that? Well, it goes back to what Dan Miller said about having economic validation. I mean, if a 18-year-old kid is really passionate about hunting, unfortunately, it's like, well, how are we gonna find any economic validation in that? So we got to utilize some skills to bring some value. Hunting's great, but it maybe doesn't bring value to the world to create income. So I think that's a bigger part of the conversation for a young person. Again, it's not that it's not part of the conversation to a retiree, but it has less weight, so to speak. So again, I think it goes back to this idea that retirees are positioned so well to now just go for it, where they can really just swing for the fences and go after the things that really, really push them. I think that's a great point. One thing, too, we haven't talked about here in the last couple of shows, and I think we need to bring it up. Your kind of marquee Bible verse that you even sign all your books for comes from 1 Peter. Describe that to really give people kind of an overview as to how we're viewing this whole side of this miniseries.
Yeah, every time I sign a book, I put 1 Peter 4:10 it right below my signature because I want people to look it up and see what it says. It says, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. It basically highlights that. We've all been given so much, right? We've given so much time, talent, and treasure, and you are a steward of that. And part of this, applying to today's show, is you have certain things that you're good at. You really need to bring passion to that and to do more, not just for yourself, but we're looking at how can you serve others? How can you, and I think that's the secret to all of this is if I can add some talent, I can bring some skill set to what I'm doing, I can have passion, and then I can combine that with actually making a difference for others. I mean, really, that's what work is.
Everybody's winning.
That's right. Everybody wins. Yeah. And you are able to walk into that fullness that we talk about. Now, does that mean I can't enjoy a vacation feel and that type of thing? No, it actually makes that time better.
Yeah.
So I think that verse really highlights, I think Samuel Johnson said this, and I think it's one of my favorite quotes. He says, we need to be reminded more than we need to be instructed. That verse, if anybody is listening to not a believer, I don't think you'd have a problem with those words. We should use our gifts to serve others because we've been given a lot. That's really what this is about.
Yeah. We're going to go through some questions here and some questions to consider to maybe help you hone in on where your passions lie. I think an interesting point or something we need to talk about before then is when you can get in alignment, and that's a word that we'll use occasionally on this show, but when you get aligned and you kind of get into that sweet spot, Dan Miller also talks about living in that sweet spot where you've got, the best of everything kind of coming together. It doesn't feel, even though you're having impact and you may be, quote, working, it doesn't feel like that. Can you describe that sweet spot that people will experience?
Yeah, working, if you're working in your passion where you've actually been gifted with some talents and abilities, it doesn't feel like work. I think that's my favorite thing about retirees. Sometimes they kind of like, oh, I think I'm working. I'm still working. I failed retirement. I'm like, well, it doesn't feel like it, does it? No, because you're walking into that spot. You're walking into that place where you feel alive. You feel invigorated. You're doing what you're supposed to do. And back to the way I kind of open this is, if you're in a spot of discontentment and you're listening to this show today and you're not even thinking about retirement, look to find those three areas and walk into it, because I think God may be putting on your heart there is something out there that's different, right? And read that book from Dan Miller, review kind of his concept, because the best place we can be, whether you're working or retired, is a place where you feel like you're walking into God's fullness. Like, have you ever felt like, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be today? That moment comes up quite often if you are living a life where you're following some of these ideas.
Yeah, and again, the old way would say, if you're feeling discontent and you're not retired, once I take work out of the picture, then I will feel fulfillment. And it just doesn't, taking it out, removing something from my life isn't what's going to bring that feeling that I think a lot of people are looking for. We've got a couple of minutes left here. Let's go through some questions. These are questions that we use in Repurpose University. These are questions that we've used in our practice coaching retirees. We do kind of to get them thinking. If people are unsure where their passion lies, what are some questions that they can ask themselves to kind of help, kind of unfold some of these ideas?
First question, Jared, I'm always going to say, if money was not a constraint, in what ways would you spend your time and energy?
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to start. And then further, if time was not a constraint, what would you do right now, and what do you feel like you have a passion for? And I think the third question, which is probably more important even yet, is think about who can I serve? So going back to that 1 Peter 4:10, right? You're serving others. Who do I best feel like I can serve? Whether that be right close to you in your own family, maybe it's your community, maybe it's the world, maybe there's a people group. So look at that as who I'm going to serve. So if you can answer those three questions, I think you're well on your way.
I think a really easy question, and this is probably the one that comes easiest, and it has to do with, again, taking away the economic validation. if you did not have to make money and could spend your time doing whatever you wanted with whomever, what would it be? And that's kind of a question that we can leave people with here today.
Yeah, think of it this way. Fill in the blank, right? I thoroughly enjoy doing blank because it makes me feel truly alive and I sacrifice things to do it. Or I enjoy blank so much that I'd be willing to do it for free.
Thank you so much for listening to this conversation on what makes you come alive. If you or your small group or maybe your Bible study needs more help in this department, a great next step would be Repurposed University. It's a 5-lesson class taught by Ben Tages and myself to help retirees and pre-retirees find their new repurpose in retirement. If you want more information, just go to our website, retirerepurposed.com. Until next time, I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you then.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.